Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the next episode of StreamTime Sports. My name is Chris Stone, the community lead, joined as always by our CEO, Nick Meacham. Now, Nick, when this podcast comes out, it might be a little outdated, but I want to start by sharing a brief story and then issuing an apology, if you will allow me to do so.
Oh, the floor is yours, Chris. The floor is yours.
So I think I've mentioned on the pod, or at least I've mentioned it to you, I am trying to get back into golf this year. So spent some time on Google, was looking at golf lessons, may have looked up, do I want to buy not a whole set of new clubs because, I'm not good enough to do that, but maybe I want to buy a club for myself. And of course, the internet does its thing. Every time I'm on Instagram, every time I'm on TikTok, I'm just getting served golf ad after golf ad. Well, I get on YouTube, and of course, it starts serving me golf videos. And we had previously talked about, Bryson DeChambeau and, his YouTube channel, some of the things he's doing. And it just popped up. I didn't have anything going on. It was Bryson tries toughest course in America. I was like, all right, fine. I'll click on it. And it was him practicing in Oakmont before the U.S. Open, him having a practice round. So I watched the full 40-minute video. Then I watched a couple more videos. And then, I've said on the podcast before, I'm not into individual sports. I don't watch golf. I don't watch Formula One. I don't watch tennis. Well, that weekend, after watching that YouTube video that was served to me because I had Googled golf clubs, I actually went and watched some of the U.S. Open, and this is where the apology comes into place. As a Bengals fan, I curse everyone that I root for, so I will apologize to Bryson for missing the cut as my fault. But I thought it was a great anecdotal story. We talk about, the funnel, the pipeline. How do you get people through? And it happened. It happened to me, Nick, just the way that, the PGA or whoever, would have drawn it up. Interest in playing golf, ends up watching the U.S. Open, and there we go, Nick. I thought it was a very worthwhile story to share.
You're the prototype fan journey right there. I mean, there's a couple of interesting things, right? Like I think the effect that it's had on particularly Bryson DeChambeau's fan following, because for a while before he started doing this content, he was actually seen as a bit of a bad guy, a bit arrogant, etc. And now by just taking back the the facade and the curtains and sort of opening yourself up, you then become a bit more personable, a bit more real. Also, those videos are heavily edited and produced. But nevertheless, he comes across well in them. They're really engaging, well-created content. I've watched more of that stuff than I have of probably a live golfing event, save for maybe the Masters. Actually, no, I didn't get to watch the Masters because I couldn't get on the year before. So I think that sort of thing is so essential to driving fandom in the game of golf. Actually, and I just went to the range for the first time over the weekend, and there were more young people playing there than anything else. And I bet you they probably follow a similar-ish journey of like watching younger players, well-produced clips and longer-form content that is it's engaging the whole way through, which golf can go a little bit up and down in terms of that narrative. So I'm not surprised that it had that sort of impact. I think it seems to be having that sort of impact right across the world. But fun, I think it's a fact. I'm going to say it's a fact that I do believe that one of the things that's been celebrated by people around the live golf movement is the fact that Bryson DeChambeau's only really been able to do this channel since he moved to live golf, because I do think there's some conflict with what he can and can't record as a PGA Tour player, but he has more freedom and license to do what he likes from the live golf perspective. So I can't remember the specifics. I read this quite a long time ago. I didn't know you were going to bring it up here, but otherwise I would have double checked it. But yeah, he has more license to create more content, and that's what's enabled this initiative. And I think as a result, I think it's a significant sort of a move or an impact to the game of golf's fandom, as any single thing that's happened in the industry is just that they doubled down and really went hard at it. And he's now at the forefront of one of the most followed golfers in the world, if not the most followed current set of golfers, just because of this investment in creating great content.
Well, it's interesting because I spoke to some of my friends about it, and whether it's because they're English and they just don't like American golfers or whatnot, they're like, yeah, his YouTube channel is really annoying because I actually don't like watching him live, but they are like, we do struggle with how well he actually does come across on his YouTube channel. So, and, just to shamelessly plug, last week's pod was around the athlete economy, creator economy, and talking about where do we want to see sports in the next 3 to 5 years. And, World Badminton is not a organization the size or have a participation level at a grassroots level That might actually be wrong. Actually, badminton might be really popular grassroots level. I don't know. But, they're leaning into their athletes to produce content. They're saying, some of their best produced content is behind the scenes, get ready with me. It's actually not the live content. And I can totally see where stuff like Bryson is opening up a new level, because one of the things we talked about in that pod was you have your hardcores that will tune in to watch live. You have the hardcores that will tune in to watch highlights. But what are you doing for everybody else? If you're thinking golf terms, Tuesday through Wednesday when they're not playing the rounds, not everybody is going to want to follow that hardcore golf content.
Absolutely. No one's going to follow that stuff. And they don't actually need to become a massive fan of the sport. I think there used to be a very tight, almost like playbook that you had to follow to be a fan of the sport. And I think just now with having access to content like this, is you just don't need to follow that prototype and sit there for hours and hours and watch content, which just doesn't fit into most people's lives in this day and age. And look, for context, he's up to over 2 million subscribers, and his channel is probably a little over a year old now. Plus all the content he's creating on through all of his social media channels as well on top of that. And there's a lot of great stuff going on there. And yeah, I think that playbook is something that everyone is going to be admiring, going to be jealous of. And I'd be shocked within the next year or two, you don't see Live Golf perhaps, subject to where he ends up being, because his contract's going to be up for renewal, and he's actively said he knows what he's worth. So we'll see what that means, as long as there's this harmony between the PGA and Live Golf, because at one stage they're supposed to be coming together, and at the same time they're still competing against each other for competition, airtime, and some of the players. But let's say hypothetically they stay with Live, I'd expect in the next year or two to get some of his matches distributed or streamed live through his channel. Like, how could you not take that opportunity to reach his audience with a live stream being produced by Live Golf, just going through directly to his audience? We've had precedent of this a little bit. If you think about, firstly, were streaming on quite heavily on YouTube at the start, but also remember we covered, I think briefly, that Cristiano Ronaldo actually even streamed live matches through his YouTube channel. But that was for, I think was it for paddle? Maybe?
Yeah.
Or, was it paddle or pickleball? Paddle, I think it was paddle. I can't remember. There's one of those other racket sports that he's got a connection with. Also, because it happened to be connected with a Saudi Arabian event, which obviously he is well connected with through his allegiance to the team there in the league since he joined a couple of years ago now. So I'd expect that really. It'd be crazy if they didn't try and take that approach, is to leverage the fact he's got this crazy channel. Live Golf also did that deal with Rick Shields, who's one of the most followed golf creators, content creators online, which came under a lot of scrutiny because of the whole notion of selling out to the Saudis and so forth came through. But their goal is to really live and be front and center in this YouTube world that we live in today, and clearly they're a step ahead.
Well, we're going to segue from one PIF funded sport in Live Golf and move to another very highly linked PIF funded. It's not officially funded, but there are alleged sort of ties, connections between how some of the broadcast deals work themselves out. And we're going to speak specifically about the FIFA Club World Cup. And one of the things, for us, Nick, we've been covering this Club World Cup. It seems like over a year now, when we were kind of talking about what the original broadcast deal was, were the valuations that FIFA were holding for what they wanted to sell the broadcast rights really accurate for really a new event. Then we started talking about DAZN being involved, and that's sort of where my previous little attempted segue there came in, because it also kind of timed up quite conveniently with receiving the funding that they had with the joint venture or whatever they were going to call that backing through PIF, DAZN, that partnership, and whether those two are connected. Then we went on, we've covered some of the sub-licensing where we're talking about Channel 5 in the UK or, their other partners. How are they going to make back this $1 billion? It seems like we've covered the Club World Cup quite a bit up to this stage. And now, as of time of recording this, we're about 10 days into the Club World Cup. We're getting some initial, feedback results in terms of, TV reporting, things like that. But, Nick, just first thoughts, just before we maybe go into some of the deeper stuff, how have you found the first 10 days, or what sorts of things are you hearing, seeing, reading, just kind of how it's initially kicked itself off?
Well, okay. I think we should do some scene setting, just to reset that scene a little bit of how things are playing out. But we can come back to that. I'd say my initial, to your question, my initial reaction is I want to make an effort of tuning in to see what DAZN was producing, because this is the biggest event they've ever produced by some fashion. It's also a new sporting event. There's lots of coverage around it and its place in the ecosystem, and we've covered that in bits and pieces as well, but everyone else under the sun has probably covered it. So I'm trying to get my head around basically how well it's produced. Has it got a long-term place? Is it missing something? Also, just to see what DAZN bring to the fore of producing such an event at scale, given they are basically leading the distribution, the broadcast, and everything attached with the event. And they've obviously made such a commitment to it as a FIFA in partnering with them, to get my head around what it is. Now, I have to say my experience was interesting. So I started back a couple of weeks ago, actually, where I haven't access to the DAZN platform for ages. So all right. And actually, since I've moved to Sweden. So the first step was logging into the platform, right? That was pretty seamless to get onto the platform. I haven't got any subscriptions live or anything, just a free user. But then I had to, I wanted to update my details so I could get obviously the notifications, and obviously set it to my location, because I had my UK location as the last one, which is very, very old since I've obviously moved between now and then as well. So I tried to update it, and it wouldn't allow me to make any of those changes. So I got told that I had to delete my account and come back again in 24 hours, I think it was, or 48 hours, and start again once I had deleted my account officially, and start from scratch and start a new account. So I did that, basically created an account again from scratch. Straight away, it's obviously, there's obviously pushing me into trying to buy a subscription and subscribe to the platform and pay the fee from the get-go, which is ambitious, but understandable. Most platforms would probably try to do the same. Get up and running on the platform relatively well. And the first game I was trying to watch, I'm not sure if it was their very first game, but it was in your hometown of Cincinnati, with as big a contrast in teams as you can imagine. Bayern Munich versus Auckland. I don't remember what they're called. Auckland City. Auckland City FC or something. Yeah. Basically, they're a semi-pro team, and they had to get leave from work to play. And the game was, and they had, Bayern Munich had a lot of their top stars playing, and the game was it was 10. I think it was 10-0 or 11-0.
10-0 was the final.
10-0 the scoreline. There's a couple of interesting things that I took from it. Well, one was trying to sign into it. So I got onto the platform, and also what was interesting there wasn't any options on the app to change into the local language. So I would normally change my apps into Swedish. They were all in English still. So I thought that was just an interesting little nuance. The time in the app, this is after I changed and signed up as in Sweden as a Swede, so to speak, was showing me UK start times, which got very confusing. So I missed the start. I know I missed the time. I was an hour early for the start time because of that fact. And we have an LG TV, smart TV here. I'm not sure how old the operating system is, but there was actually no DAZN app. So I had to go a bit old school, get the laptop out, plug it in, and stream it that way, which was definitely a bit of a clunky way to do it. Not an ideal user experience, but to be fair, there is not that many apps available on the LG app, on the LG Smart TV I've got. Probably there's like Prime, Viaplay SVT,
Netflix.
YouTube, Netflix. That's about it. So Netflix, the big ones are there, but it's probably one of those ones that's in a very small operating system mix. It's probably in the less than 1%, I'm guessing. So I'm giving a lot of benefit of the doubts in some of these situations, but it's just one of those things that, Netflix is there. They're much bigger. Expect it. You kind of just hope they'll be there, because then that brings down the barrier to entry for me. What else? Then, finally got on there. What was, I think, the most interesting part for me was to see that, and it was a super prude bit of business, is that Auckland had Michelob Ultra as their shirt sponsor. Now, for those that have never been to New Zealand or aren't from that part of the world, and I haven't researched this, but I'm 95% sure that Michelob is not sold actively as a major beer brand in New Zealand, yet was the front shirt sponsor. So I'd love to know whether Michelob Ultra got in touch with Auckland, or Auckland went, we're going to go find a sponsor for this, basically, to try and maximize the opportunity of all this visibility. But it was super impressive just to see that they had maximized that. And it wasn't like, I don't know what you'd expect, but like Auckland second-hand cars on the front shirt, which was possibly the risk it would have played if someone hadn't stepped up. And the other final bit before we, sorry, I let you back in, Chris, was just to see how they approached the game a little bit differently, where they'd had each individual being announced one by one into the stadium rather than just the whole team. You know, the traditional walkout of a football team where they normally hold a hand of a kid, walk out, go out there for the national anthems and like that for national games and the like. There wasn't any of that. It was one by one. They announced every single person, which, I mean, would have been a massive, major highlight for those Auckland players to think that they're stepping out in this competition, think that they would have had this chance to do it. But a few little tweaks to that experience that I'm not sure they really work. Maybe if you've got everyone who's well known, but nonetheless, it added something different to the mix.
Yeah, so I had a slightly more simplified experience because unlike you, I do have a current live subscription for NFL Game Pass. So I didn't necessarily have to go through some of the hurdles you did. And I'm guessing my LG TV must be newer because I do have an LG Smart TV and I already have the DAZN app on there again for the NFL Game Pass situation. So I tried watching it on my phone, tried watching it on my TV. I didn't have any issues in terms of that, but like I suppose as I'm a more active member wouldn't do. So yeah, I didn't have any issues from that side. I admittedly have not watched anything live via Channel 5. I mean, I'd imagine given it's linear free to air, I shouldn't expect anything too crazy about that experience, but I didn't have any of the challenges you did. But I just have a series of weird sort of more anecdotal things. And, you know, one of the things I mentioned to you before this is I am a user of the OneFootball app. I think, you know, we've spoken with many people, OneFootball. We've talked about OneFootball many occasions. I think it is an excellent football app, just in terms of as someone that uses So Rare, so just throwing some Web3 out there. It is the best football app if you need scores from around the world. What I find incredibly bizarre is when I go to OneFootball's homepage, there's no FIFA Club World Cup. When I go to their match tab, which shows you all the live matches for the day, doesn't show up there. If I go into the search bar and I search FIFA Club World Cup, they have a dedicated page, and then I can get the games there. And like I said, I'm just one user. I'm not aware of ever having clicked a preferences button that would tell me to not show that because it's a new event. But I find it very bizarre that when I go to the game day tab, it'll show me the Scottish third division matches before it showed. I couldn't find the Club World Cup. I kept scrolling through live matches today, and that was just a bit bizarre to me that OneFootball, you know, I think they would believe that they're the number one football app in the world. I imagine they've got to be, if not one, maybe two. The fact that I had to actively search to find the Club World Cup on OneFootball, you said you want to give people the benefit of the doubt. I want to say that maybe I've just clicked a preference at some point, but I don't know when I would have done that. That the fact that that's not like front and center was a bit bizarre.
It's super bizarre, and it does lead you to think about the why, and it's definitely not because it's an afterthought, right? Yeah. There would be definitely an intentional decision, whether the decision is made because of just prioritizing Scottish division because there's more commercial returns for that, or the fact that OneFootball have made an intentional decision to ignore it for political reasons. I mean, I have no idea, but it is absolutely bizarre when you think of all the clubs that are attached, and OneFootball and their history is linked with driving fandom at a club level as well as a league level, that they wouldn't be tapping into that opportunity, particularly also as they are very focused on growth in the US market. That is even more bizarre for me. I wonder if it's a location thing. I wonder if you were based in the US or other markets, you might have access to it. But I'll have a look today and see if I can have access to it here. Very, very, very strange. And I think this links comes back to this whole just question mark, I guess, on what this competition is and the different stakeholders' perception of it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Like, if someone's listening to the podcast and wants to challenge us, like, I'd be more than happy. But like, you know, you won't be able to see it, but there's the home page. At the bottom, there's a little button that says Games. If I go to Games and I scroll through, it starts with the CONCACAF Gold Cup. It then goes on to some women's friendlies. It then goes on to the Euro U21s. Then it goes on to club friendlies, which is showing me some Slovakian games. Then it goes to the Premier Division, which looks like an Irish football league. It then goes to the Brazil B League, goes to the NWSL, It goes to a bunch of leagues. I honestly don't even know where in the world they're based. And there is nothing for the Club World Cup. And I'm still scrolling 30 seconds onward. Oh, nope, finally have got there. So the Club World Cup is sitting underneath at least 20 different competitions. And that can't be a preference thing. I don't know. It's just weird. Someone can tell me why, but I find that very bizarre how difficult it is to find content on OneFootball for the Club World Cup.
Yeah, that is really strange. I'm just looking now. So I've just jumped onto the OneFootball app. I've had used it for a long time, so I've uninstalled it. Going back in now, and the first question it always asks is select your favorite team, and it gives you the ones that are most popular in the area, which is a mix between Man United and Real Madrid's and Liverpool's, and then Malmo FF and IFK Göteborg and the local teams. Let's just go in here and see if it shows anything. Am I going to say that I'm
select your local team, Nick? Select the local Swedish team.
What about Australia? I'm going to go Australia. I'll go Australia. See if they. I'm just curious to see what they. Oh, it wants me to go back. No. Oh, it's going to make me. I'm just going to skip for now and see what comes up for me. So top stories. Australia is basically the top news stories.
Mm-hmm. But obviously, based on your
you'll see the new. There's the top news has articles like the debrief as European giants put on a show at the Club World Cup. So there's news articles related to it. But anyway, I'll have a little dig on there and see if I can find anything there. But it's not standing out at the top of the page. So whether that's a tip for OneFootball to look at further, or whether that's intentional, we'll have to wait and see on that one.
Yeah. Well, let's look a little bit more directly into some of the stuff that we've seen to date. Now, there are certain data points that, probably aren't going to be shared, or, they're saying Nielsen haven't come out yet. But I was just, looking at the audiences, a little concerning from a game perspective. I think it was the Chelsea LAFC game. They're playing in the Atlanta Mercedes-Benz Dome, where the Atlanta Falcons play, also where Atlanta's United, I believe they are, the MLS team, are playing. It's just shy of 80,000 capacity, and I think average capacity for the MLS team is around 45,000. I think they said there's about 23,000, and I don't even know if that was just tickets sold versus actual bums in seats. I know there have been some really good games out in the Rose Bowl where, PSG and Milan, I think, were close to 80,000, and they've had their first supposed sellout in Miami. I think it was Boca versus Bayern, and there's been a couple games, but there's also been a lot of games where, it's been really poorly attended from an attendance perspective. And I know there's some political stuff in America that maybe people just aren't traveling this year, and maybe that's a easy get out of jail free card. But even some of the TV numbers, I had a bit of a look for what I could get, and the estimated peak audience of the Chelsea LAFC game, which I suppose is a good one to pick because it is one of the UK based teams here. They said it had a peak audience of 1.6 million is where they're at, but they said average is around 1 million. So I looked up the previous World Cup. What were the average TV rates for group matches that did not include England? And the average was between 2 and 6 million. The one example it gave me was Argentina and Saudi Arabia, around 4 million. Now that's the Messi effect. But in theory, a non-England game was having double the audience, possibly more than that. So, I don't want to put public attendance to how successful it's going to be on TV, because there's a whole different reasons. I talked about the political circumstances in America that maybe people just aren't traveling, or the fact that games are on at 1 p.m. in the middle of the workday might not have people there, or we've seen news stories about the ticket prices are having to continually be slashed, that some people just don't want to attend for the cost it is. But, some of the initial statistics I don't think are, we were promised sold out seats, and just not sure that's necessarily matched up, and a little bit of causation, correlation, where that all lines up.
Yeah, well, I don't think if we took a step back, right, and we went back to the days of when we heard this announced and heard the rhetoric, the hyperbole of what this was going to be, this event from Infantino and FIFA and the like, it was never going to reach that scale and impact. It's always, ever since day one, been met with skepticism, right, by fans, by all stakeholders in the entire industry. And when you have an event that is not universally agreed to be the event that it's supposed to be, it's never going to reach 80,000 in a stadium for a group match, no matter who's playing in that environment, particularly for games that are not relevant to the local community. It's never happened. And then the prices that they were selling tickets were extortionate up until I think recently, where they've slashed prices and put on a big marketing campaign worth tens of millions to try and fill the last sort of sets of seats. But I mean, I'm not in the room, right? But to think that playing that game at an 80,000 person stadium is the right port of call, like what most sports leagues know and understand, if you understand your supply and demand, the basics of supply and demand is, particularly in a sporting environment, find a venue that's more likely to be sold out than and likely to be empty, and then go with that, particularly for year one. It's nice to be ambitious, but don't be naive. And the reality is that's been the case right through this entire journey, whether that is just Infantino, who believes this is the grand, the great new idea that's going to transform the sport. For the concept to be successful and to expect club fans having to require international travel to come to this event when there's skepticism and uncertainty from them, some might buy into it, right? And some might massively love the idea, but there's enough people that aren't to drive. That's going to have a massive impact on people traveling and the sports tourism component of running events like this. So look, I think everyone in the industry who follows it, whether it's been following the broadcast, lack of interest in those rights at the time to the lack of tickets, this was inevitable that this would happen. The numbers that you shared, I think, you can look at those in different ways. I don't think using the England measure is probably the most fair because, let's say it's Chelsea. Well, there's a lot of fans who will not watch a Chelsea game actively. It doesn't bring the nation together in the same way. So if they're able to generate 1 million plus, I always think about it's more about the measure of what else they would have had on live on their channels and what's the relative increase as a result of having that match available. That's more of a measure of success. So I wouldn't measure it too much against the World Cup, although it is a measuring stick you can use for comparison. Ultimately, I don't know what success is going to look like here. Like, we're at the early stages. Like, how many games are we talking about that are happening in this event? I mean, do you have the number in front of you, or I've got it here?
I can't remember. Is it something around like 50 something games will be played in total between group and knockout stages?
Yeah. So 32 teams from 6 continents will play in 63 games over 30 days. 63 games over 30 days. So ultimately, what it will really matter and what we're going to remember is what it looks like towards the end rather than the earlier stages, because it's building up, right? There's momentum to be had. We're at the relatively early stages. FIFA still needs to sell out those finals, and the final being a big success with the right teams, if there are any chance for this to be sustainable as a long-term viable proposition. And they need it for the ratings. Everyone needs it to be successful from that point of view. Like, you've got to reflect, like, when this deal was announced, part of it was billion-dollar prize money that was up for grabs for the teams to be involved. I don't know the specifics of that, but some clubs are paid up to nearly $40 million just to attend and participate in this tournament. But they needed that prize money to be backed, and that's how basically the legacy of this billion-dollar deal was needed from DAZN or for another broadcast partner to basically cover the cost of this commitment that FIFA had made to putting enough money on the table to make it worthwhile for these clubs, and basically for these clubs to forego what they would normally do, which is do exhibition matches across the world in their off season, driving fandom in other markets. Big, massive price paycheck for that capability. But you think about the amount of games that some of the players are playing. I think I saw one number that was like 70 or 80 games that a player might be playing in a year with the Club World Cup if they follow it through to the finals, plus all the other friendlies and everything. That's one every 2 games a week. So 2/3 of the year. I mean, how insane is that sort of number? If you think about all the other competitions that are available, no wonder they need big squads. Otherwise, there's no chance of basically surviving some of the things that they're doing. So look, the event's been met with skepticism the whole way through. It's going to be seen with skepticism until we get through to the finals, and then we can really reflect. Okay, has it come to a point at the end where there is mass interest, mass following, to the levels that FIFA wanted for it to be deemed a success and to give it a future? At the moment, it is hard to see how that is delivered. There's just such a lack of coverage and interest in it. But if the right team's there when it comes to crunch time, then I still think they could possibly get to that port of call. Obviously, the other thing we haven't talked about is the financial side and how all that plays out. But I think from a pure visibility perspective, for it to have any chance of being met with support for the next round, they have to have the right teams at the end. Otherwise, it's just going to be a huge disaster.
Well, I mean, just anecdotally, I was golfing yesterday. I was in a party of 4, and I asked.
Keep rubbing in about the fact you've been golfing. I haven't played golf for a long time now. I'm a little bit jealous.
Well, anyways, we're on the back 9. I said, guys, I need to do some research for the podcast that I'm doing tomorrow. I was like, we're nearly through the group stages. I was like, how much of the Club World Cup have you guys watched? And all of them said, haven't watched a single second of it. And I was like, okay. And elaborate. And some of them are like, well, I don't have a DAZN account. I don't want to download it. I don't want to pay for it. And I was like, well, you don't have to pay for it. It's free. They're like, yeah, just too much of a hassle. I was like, well, you could watch it for free on Channel 5. And they're like, I couldn't tell you the last time I watched something on Channel 5. And again, my friends are not just average people. They are people that will watch the NFL all through the fall and the early parts of the new year. They are Arsenal fans, so it explains why they're not watching Chelsea or Man City, but they'll watch the Formula One, they will watch the boxing, they will watch the golf, they will watch. These are not just average sports fans. And then, I asked my Americans the same question. Well, actually, I made a comment. The same Bayern Munich game that you referenced, I was watching to see how TQL, the beautiful stadium in Cincinnati, was looking. I texted my friends, there's a lot of empty seats in Cincinnati. They were so unaware. They were like, yeah, the Reds are garbage. No one wants to go watch that, without knowing that the Reds were actually playing in Detroit. Like, the game was being hosted in the city, and like they were completely unaware. And, I was watching something on The Athletic, and I think The Athletic are one of the better sports journalism groups out there. Mm-hmm. They have a Man City reporter is out in Philadelphia for the first game, said he went to the bar. He had to ask somebody to put the club or the group stage games on. If everyone's been to America, been to a sports bar, there's usually no shortage of what you can find. So the fact that he was like, it was a non-Man City game, so it wasn't being hosted in Philadelphia where they were staying, but he had to request that it be put on. And there's only like 200 screens at any average sports bar in America. And just, like I said, anecdotal, we're talking about 9 people out of the 8 billion people on this earth, but like these are all people that are, as far as I'm aware, are hardcore sports fans, and like they're not even pretending to engage with it.
If you've been to a sports bar in the US, you will understand that it is a different experience to anywhere else in the world. There is almost more screens than people in the bar. They have so many screens showing so many different sports events. I just feel like they've just treated this Club World Cup like they would treat the FIFA World Cup to some extent. Like, you know what I mean? By like expecting just fandom would be organic and like manifest itself. And then I know they use what's that creator's name? iShowSpeed to get on his stream. And Infantino pops up with the trophy and the ball and those types of things to like try and lean into that world. But I just felt so inauthentic for him, but also for, like, Infantino popping up on that sort of channel, that I think they've really forgotten or just not taken into account how much work still needs to be done in a market it's not a regular event to actually get people to really support it at this scale. It's almost like it's been done in a cut price fashion, basically, to like, it's just going to work organically. It'll sort itself out. And the reality is it is not the case. So look, I think it's no surprising we're here at this stage. I'm still reserving judgment to see if they can pull it out at the end, if they get the coverage and exposure. Obviously, we haven't even talked much about the DAZN specifically and their approach that they've talked about. Before we jump into some of that, there's a couple of things I wanted to just share in terms of my experience, which I think are just interesting things to think about or review when people that we know listen to our podcast work in the space and might find it interesting. There's a couple of things I'll just fly through is, firstly, that they had a fan zone chat feature, which we've seen a bunch of different partners or suppliers who provide these sorts of engagement tools. They definitely lent into it. They had a fan zone in the app, which is on desktop and on mobile. Within that, basically, when you logged on and accessed, you got DAZN coins. I got paid for DAZN coins. I have no idea what I can do with those. They didn't tell me, but I've got thousands of coins now after watching a couple of games. It very much mimicked a live chat, pretty much like a live chat from Twitch or YouTube, where loads of people just writing crap, basically just writing stuff all the time. And loads of people using GIFs. You can use a Giphy in there. So basically, it was an absolute GIF fest in there. So that's obviously appeals to a certain audience. They had polls in there and just loads of emojis flying around, so you could upvote and downvote stuff that was going on through the match. And it was as well as polls on like who's the GOAT and which team you are cheering for, etc. what was actually interesting, I forgot to say it before, was when I was signing up to the platform. So the experience of sign up was I downloaded the app, and then it takes you basically to just a web page to complete your details. Oh, fine. Okay, it's not too crazy. And then it forced me, well, it forced me is not the right word. It told me to download the app, but it did it through the web browser. So it downloaded, basically maybe download 2 versions of the DAZN app, which was really weird. One was the Google Play app, and the other one was like a web-based app version on the platform. So I effectively had two apps on the same platform, which made no sense. I didn't understand why it was pushing me to do that. And then when I came back on the platform the next time around, I found it difficult to actually find the games for free. I don't know whether I clicked the wrong thing, but it was basically trying to force me into the HDRs, the high definition versions, and I would have to pay for that access, which I think was equivalent of around £7 a month or €8 a month or something like that, as part of the wider DAZN subscription. So I didn't actually find that free one that time around, and I left and came back and then found it the next time. So I don't know if that was a user error or not, but it was very, very annoying at that time. And one of the other things I think I always find it interesting and frightening is when you go onto most media website apps. I remember noticing this actually with FIFA Plus when they launched, but also seen it a bunch of other places anywhere. In fact, I just saw it with OneFootball now. But is how many vendors get access to your data from the advertising programmatic world. Have a guess how many companies are getting sent your data by logging on to one of these apps. We'll use the DAZN app in this instance.
Do you know the answer?
Yeah, I do, because I wrote it down.
Fine. Let's go with 35. 907 vendors get sent your detail. Now, that is to fuel and power. I believe this is to fuel and power the programmatic world, right? Yeah. So the ads I got served in the broadcast were Swedish language, selling me MG cars, which is, not a high-end car, but like a decent set of ads. It wasn't Jim's bakery around the corner. It was actually a legitimate car ads. So just emphasizing they are trying to drive revenue through that programmatic sphere. So the ad was in Swedish, but again, the platform and everything else wasn't. And there was no other options for broadcast commentary, which I found a bit surprising. I found it would have been nice, particularly in Europe, for them to have multiple options, whether that be not just in Swedish, but even having the options to, I don't know, try other languages and at least have that capability of alternative options, particularly when there's so many suppliers out there. Like one of the StreamTime members, Spork, provides a great service on remote commentary in different languages that you don't have that just plugged into something like this as a major event. So having it all available centrally within the platform. So there's a couple of little things. I'd say, like, overall, my summary of my experience accessing it is it worked a bit funky, a bit like clunky through the journey. That I always have found that, particularly in this smart TV era, that a lot of the major broadcasters have had weird experiences, either going to your phone, scanning QR codes, doing all sorts of things rather than all being so native as you want and then would expect. But with all these, there was a lot of little things I just didn't quite, they weren't crisp, they weren't polished. And I think sometimes it's interesting to reflect on DAZN's position. They're a multi-billion-dollar turnover or valued organization, but they are actually relatively small in comparison to a lot of the other major networks of broadcasters out there. So I was trying to judge for myself, how do I judge this experience? Do I judge it against the big guys, which is probably what they are judged again mainly, or should I be looking at the bottom end? Because they sit sort of in this middle tier, which they aren't, which makes it difficult to judge how polished their experience should be. But it was definitely rough around the edges, I have to say, my overall experience, although I did get on there because I wanted to test it. But otherwise, there were several points I might not have followed through, and they might have lost me along the way. For what it's worth, you talk about how do you measure it against? We've been fairly vocal about it. I don't think Amazon's user experience is particularly friendly for finding live sports. And I would say the only experience I've ever had was back when NFL Game Pass was being operated by Delta Tray as a standalone app. But I think it's because it was all housed in one place, where I have had similar experiences with DAZN, but it's just like I've done enough platforms that once I get into the NFL Game Pass portion of the broader DAZN app, I'm fine. But I agree with you. But the whole point of where you measure it against, I try to think, some of the other bigger platforms, like you said, I think Amazon Prime actually has gotten a little bit better. I do find their live sports a little bit easier, but I do remember in the past during the Christmas period when they would have the games or they'd have some tennis or things like that, it wasn't particularly all that user friendly trying to get between all of their original content, their licensed content, and then the live sports.
Yeah, that's actually a really good example. I'd say it's probably the worst one I've experienced. I would say back a few years ago. I would say they have definitely made massive inroads in improving it, but a couple of years ago, it was insane how you thought all the rights they had, and Amazon had the tennis, the ATP relationship where their stuff was always available, and then they had a bunch of others, and it just was not a good experience to find it, to get onto it. You had to be looking for it actively. So I know it's difficult, and I'm not saying necessarily DAZN have done a bad job, but it was just, again, rough around the edges for what I think would be an optimal user journey that I should be getting as someone who's probably a good chance of subscribing to something down the line, and trying to remove every possible friction point. One thing that Amazon has as its special sauce is that the one-click subscription, one-click payments type of thing, and OneFootball is obviously someone who's done that for quite a while on their platform. I don't know. I didn't try to click anything to buy on the DAZN app, but it would be interesting to see how that journey feels if they want to try and take my money as a subscriber. So yeah, overall, I'd be also interested. I'm going to probably maybe take a pause for a week or so, then come back on a week from now and see if anything has changed, if it's a little bit more polished, the ads are being served more regularly or whatnot. I don't know. But just see if the app experience has changed. One final bit on that is I'm absolutely getting hammered with notifications now. I don't know. I ticked something in my notifications box on DAZN. Now I'm getting hammered with updates. I must have had 40 yesterday, I think, for goal announcements, red cards, kickoff for matches. So I have to go back in and sort that out. But I think that is indicative not just of a DAZN, but also just, I think, of all broadcasters to find that middle ground, or platforms, find that middle ground of where you sit, how much content is enough content to serve a consumer. Can you be the ESPN of sports globally and be this place everyone's going to for all their news-related content? Because we haven't even talked about the fact that also FIFA announced this new partnership, this additional partnership with them to expand the coverage of FIFA Plus on the platform as well, which is another extension of this very what would you call it, tricky mix of deals that are being done around FIFA, around DAZN, around the World Cup.
Yeah, well, there's a couple things you brought up in that made, I completely forgot that DAZN were doing any betting, because they at one point it shut down there, but now it's back. So I didn't realize that until I jumped on the app, and maybe it's because I've not been on the app really since the NFL season ended. But I was really surprised to be logging on and getting served some of that stuff around the Club World Cup with some of the betting. I kind of forgot that was a part of the DAZN gameplay. But one of the other things you talk about, the big marketing push, and again, I'm just one individual person, but just going through my anecdotal experiences, I've been looking out for it. And the only thing that I have seen is I saw one double-decker bus that had just, some pretty generic, DAZN tune in to watch the Club World Cup. But I don't remember seeing other, billboards. I don't necessarily remember getting any kind of serve targeted ads on my social media. It does feel, and maybe it's because they're pushing that marketing budget towards the US, because that's where they're hoping to drive ticket sales and things like that. But just being in London, even from a marketing perspective, I've not seen a ton of stuff, which I think to the World Cup or the Euros, the amount of stuff, you might see for the English national team. And maybe this is a byproduct of, not having a national team, but Chelsea's based in London, it's not I know they've spent a ton of money on marketing. I just don't know where it's gone to or where they're putting their priorities at.
I don't know either, but I mean, look, let's talk before to wrap things up. I'd say there's a couple of bits I still want to cover, which we've probably spent more on than I expected on that experience. But to talk about, there was obviously the announcement last week around DAZN and FIFA's relationship expanding, with them now taking FIFA Plus into the DAZN platform. Now, I mean, it's interesting for a few reasons. What I haven't come to grips with, so for those that didn't see it, they've announced that they're going to create this home of football destination within the DAZN app, which will house FIFA Plus content. So FIFA Plus has all of its member associations can basically broadcast live matches on the platform. They have an editorial output. They have short documentary content, etc. And they're going to create this home of football within the DAZN app. So what I did was just to reach out to that. I was like, firstly, try to understand what the relationship actually would look like, whether it would be truly exclusive, because, like the NFL Game Pass one, I reached out to FIFA to try and get my head around what it was and what it wasn't. I got met with a very straight bat of everything we can tell you is in the press release, which tells me a lot of nothing. But basically, that they're creating this platform. What I wanted to know basically is, are they both creating editorial content that's going into this destination? Is FIFA Plus basically as a platform being sunset, shut down? And is it all going into this platform exclusively now, like Game Pass International was? Or will they have the FIFA Plus product still living on, but then have a separate destination in the DAZN platform? Now, I read an article by Carlo DeMarcus. He was seen to suggesting that it was going to be the Game Pass approach. But I asked him, and he hasn't come back to me with anything specific. It's like, I asked him how he came up with that, because I can't see any details that determine that is actually the approach. But I need to check in with him to see if he's got any further information. But so I'm not sure what that is. But is it massive? Is it basically that product that FIFA Plus was launched under much fanfare a few years ago as this great new thing? Tried to raise $2 billion in invest private equity funding a while ago, and now is this being wrapped into the DAZN product? Or is it going to live on and have two places and destinations, which I hope is that, rather than just it becoming FIFA, just because I think that's a better approach by FIFA. However, given the relationship between DAZN with FIFA, with the Saudi Arabian money coming in, etc., to support the World Cup, to have the World Cup in Saudi, to have the Club World Cup being heavily supported by PIF, to have DAZN being backed by Riyadh Seasons and having Saudi visible on the platform so heavily, to receive the surge investment, which is basically $1 billion into DAZN, and incorporates the MENA offering of DAZN being launched as part of that approach. It's just really difficult to understand why this deal is happening. It doesn't make a lot of sense if it was to be just put into the FIFA, to the DAZN platform, how that would benefit FIFA's longer term goals of having max visibility, given DAZN's current place on a global scale. It works for DAZN. It gives them another asset to play with, another reason for people to come to the platform they didn't have before. So it gives them access to a lot of new markets, which is definitely healthy for them for the storytelling and for the reach perspective, even if it's not top tier rights. But I'm a bit lost as to why this would happen, other than it's just linked with this whole web of deals, and maybe the Club World Cup and I'm speculating here, right? But maybe the Club World Cup hasn't delivered what DAZN were told and sold by FIFA, and this is another addition to that to basically sweeten the deal for DAZN through all this. I'm not really sure, but basically it's a bit confusing. If they are sunsetting it altogether, I'm a bit at a loss as to why they would take that approach. What about you?
It's I have my own personal opinions, which I just probably will try to phrase in a different way, or maybe on a different platform. I think it's hard to deny some of the different relationships, the choice. I am on board with the conspiracy theory about the World Cup in 2030, the fact that they're hosting it in 3 different continents, which the conspiracy theory goes that it's a way to accelerate the pace with which they can return to a Middle Eastern venue. Like, it sure seems, I know they've wrapped it up and it's a ceremonial World Cup and they're hosting it in all these different countries and they've listed out all of these reasons. But it's hard to ignore that basically, I think it is the 2034 World Cup, basically went to Saudi Arabia, and I think Australia was like the only other potential option. I think they basically read the tea leaves and didn't even bother applying to host it. So is it somewhat like Live Golf and PGA, where you're trying to create a competition to ultimately create an end product through that process that is more favorable towards what you're looking to achieve? I don't think the Club World Cup is equivalent to the Super League, but like, is there a similar mentality in terms of trying to harness a larger or cut a larger piece of the football media value pie by doing this. Like it feels a little bit like that.
Yeah. Look, I don't know how to really address this succinctly or what have you. In short, there's a lot of money and influence, etc., that's come from the Saudi Arabia through PIF and other means, through Surge PIF and other means, that is now filtered into football right across the ecosystem. SPL's growing, the Saudi Premier League's growing rapidly. They've made huge investments there as well. I don't believe there is any way that DAZN would have done this deal to buy the Club World Cup rights at the level they had without having that support coming in from a key stakeholder or two, like Surge PIF and the Saudi Arabian side. There's just no way that I think they would be able to justify that investment. Now, there could be some other political reasons to do it. Like, for example, they want to prove themselves to try and attract a bigger investment in rights down the line. You can play all those cards out, but I don't think this would be the optimal way unless you get some money coming in from other places to basically bankroll and fund this and make sure that this initiative is financially protected, let's say, and viable for the future, given everything that's been decided at a presidential level, whether it be at FIFA or across the Saudi Arabian side. So it's complex and it's simple at the same time. I think it could just be as simple as that money's coming through various means, through sponsorship of the broadcast, through investment. Ultimately, the end result is lots of exposure through DAZN's platforms, a World Cup coming to Saudi Arabia in a time. It has to be all. It feels like it has to be all connected. I could be wrong, but it feels like it has to be all connected. So the question is, ultimately comes back to the one final question for me, which is probably where we wanted to have started. But I think coming back to it is the viability and value of doing this event for DAZN. The $1 billion number is the one we've seen shared. There was a number shared by Sport Business's Frank Dunn, who'd done some work on trying to reporting and done some work on basically looking at where the revenues were coming from. And roughly there's a couple of $100 million coming out of sub-licensing deals and a couple of $100 million perhaps coming out of advertising and sponsorships. Now, whether that sponsorship and advertising includes the Saudi money, Riyadh Seasons being one of the major broadcasters that's incorporated into it, I don't know. But Frank's a very reliable source for insight and probably has some good ears to the ground there. The question is, if that gap is roughly $400 million or so from that $1 billion number, how do they make it up? Maybe securing some new subscribers to the platform. Maybe further programmatic revenue might be coming in on top of that. I haven't read the full details of what was published, but the crux of it is that can't be a surprise to DAZN. So they had to be going this with eyes wide open that this is possibly the approach that would play out. But they had that surety and backing that this wouldn't be a disaster if they weren't able to bridge that gap directly through direct revenue streams related to those rights. And that's ultimately, I think, how it must have played out.
Yeah, well, like I said, Nick, I kind of, we segued. We've talked about this story in different ways, seemingly for what feels like a year now. We'll tune back in because I think, to your point, it probably is inappropriate to judge it based off of group round games that we knew were not going to attract audiences. Let's see when we get out to the knockout stages and the potential final, see where we end up. I don't know if just having the semifinals and the finals be PSG versus Bayern Munich and Lionel Messi's Inter Miami versus whatever team you want to name is enough to justify the other 60 games that will have occurred before then. But I think we're hesitant to say it's the success that I think some people have been trying to say that it's been validated so far.
Yeah, well, we can reserve judgment, but I think they've got a lot of work to get to a point where I think it's been validated rather than starting at a point zero. So we will have to wait and see if they can pull it off and make this a viable thing in the end. But at the moment, it doesn't feel like it's heading that direction unless there is some real momentum generated over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll keep following it, and we will definitely update you when we get to that stage. But thank you again for joining in for this episode of StreamTime Sports.
Thanks, everyone.
Now, before you go, if you liked what you heard today, be sure to rate and review and just let me know what you think on social. You can find me on most social platforms as SportsProNick. And please do spread the word of the podcast. There's no better way of marketing than word of mouth, whether that be in person or on social media. And if you don't like what you've heard, or you think we should be doing more or less of something, then reach out and let me know, as I'd love to hear from you. Thanks, Streamtimers. Until next time.